So, good morning, everyone. Good morning again. Good to see you. We are 6, including myself. Hopefully, the other group, the other will join along the way. So today is the last meeting for this lecture on a research proposal. And in theory, at the end of today, so Alice is joining. So in theory, at the end of today, you should be able to get your proposal ready in few weeks, if you haven't, because some of you have already submitted their proposal to the supervisors and all those things. So that is the objective of this proposal discussion. So today we're going to talk about the methodology section, and unfortunately we won't be able to do the statistic the way I would love us to do it, but we'll see. When we get to that point. So we talked already about the objectives. So this time around, we're going to be referring to objectives along the way. So the methodology section, before I get to the details, I think it is important that I provide the summary that you see on the screen here. I say the methodology section, this is where you tell in detail how you intend to reach each of your objectives. And you see I put each in capital. There is a reason why I put each in capital. And I'm going to talk about it. You will see that often along the way. Each in capital because each of your objectives determine the methodology that you're going to use for your study, or you're going to define for your study. So in the second bullet point on this section, I say there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. Your objectives determine your method. You can't be broad, you can be general, you can be general here. You have to be very specific. That means that your method should speak to each, again in capital, to each of your objectives. There's no one size fit all, mean here that it's not because you see someone did something somewhere and then you say, oh, this is so beautiful, this is so cool, I'm going to copy and just paste it in my own project. You can't do copy paste here because your study is unique. Not in the sense that it's novel. We are still doing a master here, but in the sense that it is yours. It is yours, it's not somebody else's project. So you can't copy, you can get inspiration from the literature, from what someone else has done. But this project is your project, which means your flavor, if I can put it that way, your flavor must be very clear in your project. Remember what I said last time, that we can be working on the same project, we may not be using the same approach. That's what they call your own flavor, your personality must come in, your own thinking. So I'm talking about unique here in that sense. So if you set 3 objectives for your study, there must be inverted comma, free method. You have only one methodology, but so I call it free method in the sense that one method for one objective. Each of your objective, you must tell what your methodological approach is for each of your objective. I see cases where the student have, I think I showed those objectives last time when we were talking about objective, have like 10 different objectives in the objective section. So when you have 10 objectives, it means in theory that I'm expecting you to tell your methodology for each of those objectives. That's what it should be. So if you set 3 objectives for your study, there must be, inverted comma, 3 method in the sense of one method, one objective, or one objective, one method. For each of your objective, for your objective number 1, you need to tell what your methodology would be for that particular objective. For objective number 2, you have to do the same. So now, that's what I mean here. So this is the introduction, that the quick background that I want to provide for this discussion. Now, let's go to the different section that I would expect in a methodology section. So these are sections. You can divide it into subsection as you see fit. But these 3 bullet points here on this slide are so important that you can't do without them. The first one is study area, your study site. And the second one is the data collection. And the last one is the data analysis. So these 3 bullet points form your method section. Right. So in this order, in this sequence. So when you open your method section, I'm expecting you, okay, not me, everyone, expecting you to talk first about the study area. So the study area, this is where you introduce to your reader. This is where you introduce the area or the site where you will be doing your study. So what do I mean by introduce or present the study area? There are a number of parameters or a number of characteristics of the study area that you need to talk about. And the first of all, is the geographic location. The geographic location of your study area. Where is it geographically? And I put it in bold because you can't talk about the study area without the geographic location. I put here in bracket, this is compulsory. And here you have to insist on information that may lead someone who does not know your study area to easily find it. So you may describe the 4 boundaries. You may mention the 4 boundaries that constrain the location, including the GPS coordinate. You can't do without that. Now, the other parameters that you see here, the bullet points. So I didn't put them in bold for a reason. I didn't put compulsory in bracket here for a reason. The reason being that it all depends on your study. So you may talk about climate, geology, or the soil. You may talk about the flora and fauna. You may talk about the population or the river or the type of ecosystem you're looking at in the area, etc. But something that you have to bear in mind here is how much information, how much detail you provide for climate, geology, flora, fauna, population, etc. How much information you provide here will depend on your project. So I give here 2 examples to illustrate what I mean. So if, for example, your project is purely social, you're looking at how communities respond to something, you're looking at the difference between communities' behavior or perception, it is then obvious that you should provide more details on the factor population in this section. What are the different communities? Because you're working on community, what are the different communities you're seeing? What is the population in terms of size, population dynamic maybe? And so there's anything that is social, because your project is more social, anything that is social become relevant. So you can have a project like that, and in your study area, 3/4 of the paragraph is about geology, and you have only 1 line or 2 on the population, when your project is 100% about communities or population. If your project is about biodiversity or conservation, I would expect you to provide more detail on the fauna or flora, depending on which one you're looking at, than anything else, right? So these are important. If you're working on climate change impact on communities or something, so you need to describe what the climate look like in the area in more detail than, for example, the river system or the geology, etc. So this is just a guide of different points that you can highlight in your study area when you're presenting that section in your study in your project. So, and I put here, do not forget to provide the map, a map for your study area. So your GIS skill now become important. And do not forget to provide any other graphical or image illustration of anything that is relevant to your study. If you're working on a biodiversity related project, providing a map or vegetation map, or if you're working on population, providing a graph of how the population of that particular area has been changing over time become important. So it's all depend on the objective of the study. So, but the key message here is that illustration is key. Don't write a proposal which is 100% text. Illustration is very, very important. And in the study area, you can't do without a map of your study area, and make the map very clear, very obvious for whoever is. Imagine you're working on a village. I mean, your study area is a village somewhere in Limpopo, for example, and you just provide that map, only that map of the village or the district. But you are not helping anyone unless you provide first the map of South Africa, and you locate that particular district within the map of South Africa. Then it become more informative than just you providing the map of that particular district. You get what I mean. So the next point in your methodology is about the data collection. Now, after you have introduced the area where you'll be working, the next one is data collection. So this, again, there's no one size fit all here too. It's not because for several projects, someone has been using one approach, oh yeah, I'm gonna use the same, just copy paste. No, remember what I said earlier, your project is your project because you are unique. The way you think, the way you reason is unique. We must feel that unicity in your project. That's what I called earlier your flavor, your personality. You copy paste because I did, somebody else did, use the same or similar approach, you just copy and paste. That's not what is required here. So this is where you tell the following. what type of data you need for your study, and how you intend or how you plan to collect those data. And I put here in brackets the design of data collection. And again, it is important. Although you may be very good in English, very good in writing. If you can, it will be again very helpful if you have a map or a graphical representation of the design. It also helps a lot. So text plus something visual is always helpful, right, in conveying a message in a project. Now, and I put here in bold, at this stage, do not plan for data collection without the assistance of someone with a statistical mind. You may not be very good in statistics. That's not a problem. But always question someone who has maybe more experience in data collection, even if the person is not a statistician, but ask someone, discuss it with someone, not necessarily your supervisor, before you go to your supervisor, because you have to show the day you meet your supervisor, you have to show that, yes, you have spent some time thinking about this project. You have spent some time thinking about how you intend to collect the data. And by the way, UJ has, there is an office of statistician at UJ. Their role is to assist students in designing or data collection, or in analyzing, helping students to analyze. Even if you ask for help, you still need to understand, because remember, this is your project. One day someone will ask you a question about that project of yours. You shouldn't be saying, oh no, I actually didn't understand, a statistician did it for me. Oh no, my supervisor, like someone was saying yesterday, 2 days ago on Monday, one of my student were presenting, and they presented their proposal, their result actually. And one colleague asked us, so why do you do it this way and not following a different approach? And the student said, oh no, my supervisor actually asked me to do it that way. No, you must not do that. Even if you ask for help, you still need to understand, ask the person to explain to you why he suggests that particular method or approach for data collection or for data analysis. It is important. You will go to a conference, you will present your work, someone will ask you a question. Avoid by all means an answer like, no, my supervisor asked me to do it that way. So if you think on your own about how you're going to collect your data, the day you meet with your supervisor, it will be more about discussion, between you and your supervisor. So this is what I think we should be doing. The supervisor will be asking some question and propose a different alternative. Then the student-supervisor relationship become very interesting if it is that way. But if you go to supervisor and the supervisor also, oh, why do you choose this approach? And be like, oh no, I saw it in the literature. No. Or someone asked me, oh, the statistician that I consulted say I must do it that way. No. Just avoid that by all means. So even if you believe that your study is qualitative, it is important that you ask for the assistance of someone who, if you're not, very familiar with quantitative or qualitative analysis, it happened. It's not a crime, but always ask someone to have a look at your approach. The reason why I'm insisting on that is that imagine that you have spent already a lot of money going to the field, spending time, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months in the field collecting data, and you come back and the statisticians say, actually, with these objectives and the way you collected your data, we're in trouble here. We can't really analyze this data to answer that particular or those particular questions that you said for your study. But you have already spent time, a lot of money, your energy, and all those things. But you don't want that. It happened. Eh? It happened. It's not like I'm saying nonsense here. It happened where, or sometimes you and your supervisor agree on something. You go to the field for data collection and you change along the way. It is possible because what you think of in your office, on the ground, the situation is different, and you decided without consulting, without any consultation with your supervisor or any statistician, you decided to collect the data in a completely different way. So analyzing the data may be very, very problematic at some point. So that's how important it is when you are, I mean, you don't just think of some data and then you just go and collect it. And then later on, you're like, okay, when we get to the analysis, we're going to figure out how to do it. No. All right. So the next point that I highlight here is the type of data that you need are determined by the objective you set for your study. No one size fit all, because that's what we see. Someone set several objectives, and you see, I will give some example here. So the data that you need for objective 1 may not necessarily be the same data that you need for your objective 2 or for objective 3. So no generalization for all objectives. You see a student write things like, data required for this study will be collected using semi-structured interview. That's it, that's the methodology. That's the methodology, one line methodology. Data required for this study will be collected using semi-structured interview. The problem here is that which data are you talking about? And for which objective exactly? Are you going to use the same data for all objectives? Even if that's the case, we still need to know which data are you going to collect? Because it's so vague to say data collected will be analyzed. Which data and for which objective? Even if you have a sound questionnaire, you still, okay, if your work requires some questionnaire, you still need to highlight what data exactly you will be collecting for each of your objectives. All right. So the next point here on this slide on data collection is, I said here, you have to think also of the sample size of the data. There is a formula to have an idea of the sample size, but this is a point that I want to highlight. This can be constrained by a number of factors. The time for the study. You're doing a master, you need to finish in 1 year, not in 5 years, not in 10 years. So you have to, this one can be constrained by the time frame of the study, the funding available, the manpower. So all those parameters that you may not control may influence your final decision. Even if you have, with your formula, you have an idea of what the sample size should look like. In any case, you have to find a compromise between this constraint and the science. It's not because you say, oh, statistically, I need to interview or to have 200 sample size. I mean, 200 sample of water, for example. Let's say you're working on water in a river, you want to sample some waters, you say, oh no, statistically, or you're working on the population of Eastern Cape, you'll be like, oh no, statistically, I need to interview maybe 5,000 people. No, you can't do that. Although that is what your formula say, because you need to take into consideration time, funding, manpower, and all those parameters that you may not have control over. but in the meantime, so that's why consultation with a statistician become important to find a balance between what has to be done from a statistical perspective and what you can do to still have a valid conclusion. So you also need to think of the sampling site. If you're working on the water system, for example, are you going to collect your sample at I mean upstream or downstream? Sorry, my thing going. Look like give me 2 seconds, please. Yeah. So are you going to collect your sample upstream or downstream? So your knowledge of the system become important. Imagine you are interested in potential impact of a waste plant, for example, on water quality of the particular system. So the location of that plant become important in how you're going to design or identify your collection point, your sampling point. So the sampling, you also need to think of the sampling method. Are you going to collect every day, every month? And if so, how often? In winter, in summer, or both? And how often per season? So you need to sit and think of all those things. So you also need to think of the method for collection. So in the data collection section, you need to provide information on all these aspects. So in terms of method for collection, are you going to use a semi-structural, a structured interview? Are you going to do some lab experiment? Are you going to do some sample collection? Are you going to, to collect, okay, I already talked about the frequency of collection. So you need to think of all those things. And something that I didn't mention here, are you going to use what they call secondary data? Especially those who are working on water quality. Maybe the water affairs, the Department of Water Affairs have already, has a huge data set or that particular system you're working on. Are you going to use their data? If so, you still need to explain in your data collection section how they did their sampling. How did they do? You still need to explain. So which means we don't just get the data from the department, but you also need to understand how they collected the data and explain that in your data collection section. So the sample size is important. I'll talk about it. So I see you have here some illustration of, so if, well, this one is, we can do that. You know what a sampling is. We can't work. The ideal is to work on the entire population, but we can't do that. So we need to identify the samples and how many, what is the sample size, and that we need to work on. So just quick call for attention here is if you, let's say if you're doing some social studies, put here caution. You have to exercise caution when you are doing your sampling. Some choose what they call convenient sampling or voluntarism. So there is a number of questions that you have to ask yourself if those approaches for data collection are suitable for your own study. So all depend on your objective. For convenience, for example, asking people on the road, can the timing be a problem? You have to think of it. Are the people that you are, who will be your respondent, are they relevant to your work? For if you are using what they call the voluntarism, so that means you're inviting people to participate in a survey. What if most do not comply or do not respond? And what if it's only your friend that, who respond? So there is already kind of bias in your sampling. So you need to be aware of those things. So some more interesting sampling method if you are working on people, I give, because, so I'm insisting on this one, on the social aspect, because most of the answer, most of the aim and objective that I got when I asked you guys to send me your project, I mean, it was more about to interview community. So simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling, systematic sampling. These are more interesting than the voluntarism. And I'm not saying you cannot use them. It will be on your own judgment. You define, you decide what to do based on the objective you set for your study. So I put here in red, do not go to the supervisor, I think I already said it, without thinking on your own on the data you think you need to collect and how you plan to collect them. If you do think about it, so the interaction with your supervisor becomes very interesting from a supervisor perspective. You discuss ideas, you change, instead of just going and say, okay, then the proposal has been approved by the faculty. The coursework, yeah, I got distinction, that's fantastic. Now tell me what next now? No, that's not the way it should be. And so I put here an assignment, a quick assignment that we're gonna do together here, just to illustrate the story that I've been talking about. So remember the objective that I showed in one of the slides previously. If you were to do the study, so tell us what data you will be collecting. So here are the objectives for the study. I already talked about it. To investigate if water quality changes with the farming activities in the village X. Objective 2, to test the hypothesis that rivers closer to farms will be more polluted than not, and to determine how farmers adjust their farming strategy to in response to climate change in the particular village X. So if these are your objectives, so remember what I said, the first point that I said for your data collection section is you need to identify what do you need to collect, what data you need to collect. You set the objectives, that's fine, but now you get to the data collection. What students usually write when they set an objective like this, they'll be like, the data collection will be done using semi-structured interview, full stop, that's it. Without telling us which data exactly will be collected, how will it be collected, and what is the design of data collection. So I want us to discuss this very briefly. If it would be great if someone can share his or her ideas about these three objectives. I have more than that. I have this one, for example, that I got from some of you. But let's do the first, this one first. You can do this one. You can think of this one at home, but we can also discuss it here. I'm almost done with the presentation, but I think it's important that we illustrate this. So can someone, where is it now? Can someone tell us which data the person will be collected if you were to do this study? Objective 1, to investigate if water quality changes with the farming activities in the village X.
Sir, Doc?
Yes.
If I may?
Yes.
I think objective 1 could possibly determine it by probably checking water quality upstream of the farm and then again downstream of the farm to determine whether or not there are any changes in the quality.
Okay, so before we get to the sampling site, upstream or downstream, so the question that I'm asking here, that's great what you said. That's not That's not, it's not the problem. But what I want us to think of, let's take the objective number one. Which data are you going to collect? Which data? I'm not asking yet how you're going to collect them. Which data do you think you need? If you have these kind of objectives.
Water samples.
Yes, water sample.
And I think maybe we might want to be interested in knowing what farming activities actually happen in this particular village.